Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, with one of the most extraordinary, amazing, remarkable pieces in all of 18th century music. I'm referring to Haydn's 1786 masterpiece, The Seven Last Words of the Savior on the Cross. Now, lest this sound somewhat dreary, fear not. We are talking about Haydn, which means it's always interesting. And this is yet another work in which he basically invented music as we know it, which he did for just about everything that came later. Now, what is the seven last words of the Savior on the cross? Well, first, we need to be very, very clear about something, and that is that the words are not words. They are not words. They are phrases. They are phrases that happened while Jesus was on the cross. Some of them were supposedly spoken by him, and some of them are not at all. So they really aren't his words. It's actually rather interesting if you look at it. Let me just tell you what these seven phrases are, and then we'll talk about the circumstances in which Haydn wrote this absolutely unbelievable piece of music that we're going to be discussing, okay? First of all, the first is, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. We all know that one, right? And then, today you will be with me in paradise. That's the second one. The third one is, Mother, behold your son, which is really about the Virgin Mary. It has nothing to do with anything that Jesus might have said. I doubt he was being crucified and said, like, Mother, behold your son. That doesn't seem to work. That takes us out of the realm of utterances of Jesus himself. Then there's the sort of tragic climax of the whole thing. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? That is the moment of deepest and darkest despair in the work. Then sitio, that's in Latin, I just did, which is I thirst. These are all in Latin, but I'm not even opening myself up to that. I probably just did by saying sitio. And then, well, consummatum est. That I can do. It is finished. And finally, into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. The final of the seven words, the last of the seven words. Now, what did Haydn make of these things and why? Well, it turns out that in 1786, he was approached by two gentlemen from Cadiz, Spain, and asked to create a work for the Church of Santa Cueva, which is apparently means the Holy Grotto or Cave, a very, very beautiful Baroque church, for the Good Friday service. And apparently the way that this was done, they say, is that the church was all draped in black. There was only one light that was left illuminated, which we know really can't be true because the players had to see their music, which meant they were sitting there, as an orchestra sitting there, and they must have lit candles. Everyone just repeats this story, as though, oh yeah, sure, because this is what Haydn said, this is what he was told. And, yeah, that's the way they did it, but not when they played Haydn's seven last words, they didn't, especially the ending. So, but basically what happened is that there would be a musical introduction that Haydn wrote into this thing, and then the priest or celebrant or whoever was running things would announce the first of the phrases, the words, and then preach some sort of sermon based on that, a homily of some kind, and then he would kneel before the altar and the music would play that illustrates that homily. And then the process would be repeated through all seven of them. And then Haydn decided to give us a little razzle-dazzle at the end because he composed an earthquake, which is supposedly what happened, when Jesus finally passed away. The earth was torn asunder and all kinds of fire and brimstone things went on. And Haydn gives us 90 seconds of earthquake to wake us up at the end. Now, it is therefore in 9 movements, actually, and the piece is an instrumental piece. It is scored for 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 4 horns, 2 trumpets, timpani, and strings. But Haydn varies the scoring of each movement and only uses the full forces at the very end. And in that way, and also sets each of the different movements in a different key. So he keeps it fresh. Haydn said, I don't know what I was going to do. I had to write 7 adagios in a row, 10 minutes each, even though there was some talking between them. He was very concerned with keeping things interesting. And the fact of the matter is, and what makes this so fascinating, and I have my text here, is that he did not actually stick to the idea of adagio. In fact, a lot of the movements are slower, some of them are faster, and again, no two are exactly the same. So there is a lot of variety in these various slow tempos, and so you have changes of texture, of key, of tempo, of phrasing, and of scoring, and in terms of the way he handles his parts, the various instrumental parts, and it's an amazing work. I mean, how do you do it? It is really, in a sense, it's a tone poem. I mean, that's really what it is. It's a tone poem based on these texts, and it lasts a little bit more than an hour. Even in, most period instrument performances, they go for about 63 minutes. It is a major utterance. It is Haydn's longest purely instrumental work, and really one of the longest instrumental works of the entire 18th century. I mean, Beethoven's Eroica isn't this long. So it's an astonishing achievement, and it was immensely popular, which is sort of hard to believe because, how often are you going to have an opportunity to play it just on Good Friday? But that's not how it worked. Turns out it was incredibly popular, and so Haydn had to make lots of different arrangements of it. It's best known today, really, for most of us, in the string quartet version, which Haydn made himself, which is really kind of ridiculous because you have to hear the contrast in texture and in orchestration for the piece to make its full impact. And of course, the earthquake is ridiculous when played by a string quartet. It's a very beautiful piece on string quartet for quiet listening, and I'm not going to recommend a particular version because every string quartet does it and they're all fine. I mean, there just aren't any bad ones. It's just slow, beautiful music on a string quartet, and if you want to listen to it that way, knock yourself out. I do not listen to the string quartet version for the most part. He also did a piano sonata version, which is absolutely fascinating. He didn't actually do it himself. Someone else did it, and Haydn authorized it because, too much of a good thing, right? And the best version of that is this one, in case you're wondering. Ronald Brautigam, it's in his box of the complete Haydn keyboard music, and it's an absolutely first-class performance in every respect. And if you want to hear it in the piano version, that's a very good one to choose. These were all made, obviously, because the piece was so popular and in such demand. Haydn's publisher wanted to sell as many as he could, and people wanted to hear it at home. So the piano versions and the string quartet versions would be very helpful for that purpose. However, at the opposite end of the scale is the oratorio version. And yes, there is an oratorio version. What happened is that Haydn ran across a performance of the thing, the orchestral thing, with voices and a text on his travels to London. And he heard it and said, oh, gee whiz, I can do better than that, And so he made his own. He got Baron von Swieten. Remember Baron von Swieten, the guy who commissioned C.P.E. Bach's 6 Hamburg symphonies and Mozart's Handel arrangements, and who wrote the text for the seasons and got Haydn to do his late oratorios? Baron van Swieten was hanging around whenever you needed something. Yeah, pulled out Baron van Swieten, von Swieten, whatever his real name was, Gottfried von Swieten, and he would churn out some words and you could write your oratorio. So there is an oratorio version. All of these are the same music, except that in the oratorio version, Haydn he made it in 2 parts. After the 4th and most despairing number, which Haydn called them all sonatas, all the movements, and they are, because they're all in sonata form. After the 4th sonata, there is an extraordinary wind band introduction for his large group of winds. He enlarged the scoring a bit for the oratorio version, and it's one of the most gaunt and extraordinary pieces that Haydn ever wrote. It really is. It's worth hearing just for the 5-minute wind band introduction to part 2. But if you want to get the oratorio version, the version you should hear, and the one that I think is absolutely the best, I mean, that's been recorded a couple times too, is Harnoncourt. Nicholas Harnoncourt This thing with Concentus Musicus and you know was it the Arnold Schoenberg Choir? Yeah, and a very good bunch of four soloists, and that's wonderful. Now, of course, the oratorio version has its moments, very, very beautiful moments, and of course the final earthquake is a little bizarre, or you know, you have the chorus going, "Oh, woe is us," you know. I mean, that usual "Holy crap, it's an earthquake," you know. I mean, that's basically what they're doing, but it's an extraordinary piece as well, and it leads to the world of Haydn's late oratorio, so it's an important one too. It's a legitimate version, of course, in its own right, as are all of these others, but the most important one is the orchestral version. And one of the most interesting things in comparing the string quartet to the orchestral versions, just for those of you who are interested in this musicological discussion, is that this is one of the ways that we know that orchestras played with vibrato, just as string players played with vibrato back in the day, and that the period instrument people don't know what they're talking about. And more to the point, that vibrato was not an ornament, that it was an integral component of string texture that was used in ensemble playing and was used as accompaniment routinely, just to create a beautiful, soft, warm, singing texture, which is what vibrato does when it isn't used as a specific expressive ornament to express, you know, despair or intense emotion. It's just there, just as Leopold Mozart said in his violin treatise, it just improves the tone, and Gemignani. And the way we know is that there actually is a vibrato notation that Haydn used. There were a couple of them. There was wavy lines over things, but the other kind of notation was called portato. And if you look at the string quartet version, you know, Haydn basically made the string quartet version. I have my text score here. He made the version by just taking the string parts. That's what he did, and sort of leaving off everything else. And so if you look at the third movement here, which is, you know, Mother, behold thy son. I'm looking at it right now. You look down here, see that? See that? The string parts, you see the dots with the ties on top of them? That is notated vibrato. That, the treatises tell us, should be played with pitch variants, as you do vibrato today, although there's some question about the type of pitch variance you used, whether you did one wiggle per note or whether you just wiggled consistently. I mean, in an ensemble, it doesn't really matter, does it? But that is actual modern vibrato in that sense, pitch vibrato. And if you look at the orchestral version, which I'm going to show you right now, you will see right here, on this page right there. See that? See right there? That's exactly the same thing that we find in the string quartet version. And from this we learn the very important fact that there is no difference between ensemble playing and solo playing in terms of what the players are expected to do, which is one of the, you know, linchpins of contemporary historically informed performance theory, that soloists were not only soloists, were allowed to use vibrato, and it never happened in ensemble writing. And that's bull cookies, absolute bull cookies. And works like this show us in plain black and white that the notation means what it means, and so you do it accordingly. Anyway, one last and fascinating feature of the 7 sonatas that we should talk about is that Haydn actually set the 7 words to music at the beginning of each one. He does not expect them to be sung. However, the text is printed below the music of each word. It's quite wonderful. And so we know that the shape of the melody is based on the intonation of the actual text. And so this is vocal music. We have to always keep in mind it's vocal music of a singularly spiritual and elevated type, but it really is. And for example, I'm going to play you an example of what he means, and let you see what it means. If we go to the second to last sonata number 6, which is "It is finished," consummatum est, it's very easy to see that the opening 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 syllables, 5 notes. There's a 5-note motto that runs through the piece. under which Haydn writes the actual words. And here, let me make sure you can see this. There it is. Listen now, listen to this. You see? Consummatum est. And then the piece goes on. It's actually, in terms of the way this particular sonata works, almost exactly the same as Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C sharp minor. You know, bum, bum, bum. And then, you know, the music goes on and it incorporates that motive as a recurring refrain. Well, Haydn does basically the same thing in this sonata. It's really incredibly inventive and amazingly wonderful. It really is. So let's talk about the recordings. It's very strange, this piece, because it's such a special piece, but everyone's done the string quartet version. That's the one we normally hear because it's cheap. That's the reason. For the same reason Haydn did it. It was cheap. It was easier. The orchestral one is probably today a harder sell, and it's more expensive. It's actually a fairly large orchestra that would have been packed into this little church, and it's kind of like I said, they all would have had candles lit so they could see the music. So, I mean, the scene must have been a bit brighter than the historical reports and authorities inform us. But the work was almost completely ignored and unrecorded until very, very recently. I mean, I remember having there were versions on Hungariton with János Ferencsik, for example, and it was, you couldn't find it. It really was amazing that this incredible masterpiece, which is one of the most imaginative and extraordinary orchestral works of the 18th century, was so hard to come by. It's a little less hard to come by now, but it tends not to stay in print very long. And fortunately for us, there are some absolutely superb versions, both on regular instruments and period instruments. And so I'm going to just go through my, I don't know, how many have I got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 favorites, or the 6 best of them. One I cannot recommend, I'm sorry, because I really like the guy, is Franz Bruggen. You know, he did a very good version of the orchestral bits, but the problem is that period instrument people are, you know, have this sort of authenticity fetish that's kind of irritating. You know, I mean, they want to do it as if you were really there. And do you really want to sit through 3 hours of preaching with little musical interludes between it? Now, they don't do it quite that badly, but they do add things between the sonatas, because Haydn had, you know, when it was performed, it had things between the sonatas. All we want to hear is what Haydn wrote. We don't care about the rest of it. We don't care about preaching and talking and homilies. And I mean, maybe some of you do. I don't know. I don't. I think it's interminable. Fortunately, most people allow you to like skip the words when they have them. Bruggen, unfortunately, had a modern composer write interludes, so you don't have words. You have musical interludes in avant-garde sort of squeak bloop style between the actual sonatas, which is just horrible. It's horrible. It's a disgrace. And there are a few things that piss me off more than hearing, you know, talentless contemporary composers trying to hitch their avant-garde wagons to a masterpiece. They are parasites on the rump of musical civilization. Anyway, that's how I feel about Franz Bruggen's version, and it's a shame because the rest of it's just fine. And if only he would have done it the way Haydn wrote it and left it at that, and that's the way Haydn published it. He didn't say, "Oh, we need something between my sonatas." He didn't say that. You can play them separately if you want, but they work perfectly well when you hear them as a unified work. So, with that said, let's talk about performances. There are a couple sort of seven last word guys, and one of the most amazing of them is Riccardo Muti, who did it twice. Believe it or not, twice. Can you believe this? Look, 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 look. Here they are. You get, this is from the Salzburg Festival with the Vienna Philharmonic, and this is just a regular recording he made with the Berlin Philharmonic on Philips, or now Decca, and these are out of print. I mean, you may find them, you may not, but you know, the fact is the Berlin Philharmonic one is about 1,000 times better than the Vienna Philharmonic one. The Vienna one is live. It's a live recording. It's a sort of soft-edged and kind of fuzzy. The Berlin one is a lot better. Muti doesn't take all the exposition repeats, but it's a gorgeous performance for, you know, it's big band, traditional Haydn, which means that the earthquake isn't quite as insane as the period instrument guys make it at the end, but the playing, of course, is gorgeous, and you get a very good sense of the piece. It takes a little bit less than an hour. It's about 55 minutes long, and there's 53 minutes in this recording, this one. Do not let yourself be deceived into getting the Salzburg one. You won't be as happy, trust me. Even if you could find it, which you probably can't. But all the rest of these are extremely memorable and extremely interesting. The musical example that we played came from this one, with the Tapiola Sinfonietta, conducted by John Sturgards, on Ondine, and it's quite wonderful. This is modern instruments played in a modern way, but it's a chamber orchestra, so it has beautiful transparency, and you have to be able to tell, hear the differences in scoring. Because this is one of the principal means of contrast in the work, and you really do in this performance. The playing is crack chamber ensemble. In fact, I'm going to tell you. You know what? Let me just go through it. I want to tell you what each sonata is scored for, just so you get a sense of what Haydn's doing. Bear with me, because it really does matter, and it's very beautiful. The opening is simply 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, and strings. That's the introduction. Now, the first sonata is the same as the introduction, because the two of them they don't flow together, but they lead in. The introduction leads into the first sonata, and the scoring is exactly the same. And then we get to the second sonata, and you've got 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 4 horns, yes, and the violins. The second sonata is Today You Will Be With Me in Paradise. And then we get to the third sonata. This is Mother, Behold Your Son. And in this sonata, we're back to 2 horns, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons and strings, and a solo flute. For, the Virgin Mary, Haydn introduces the sound of the flute into the orchestral texture, which is quite beautiful. It's a movement of great humility and beauty and calm. This is not the Stabat Mater Virgin Mary, weeping at the foot of the cross. This is a portrait. Behold your son, mother, behold your son. It's a portrait of the mother, and that's the spirit that Haydn tries to evoke in this piece. It's extremely lovely and very, very, very sensitive and beautiful. Then we get to the tragic climax, which is, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? Where we've got 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 4 horns and strings. Now this one it's in F minor, and I just have to talk to you a little bit about F minor, because Haydn had a personal minor key, and we know what that key meant, which is extraordinary. Mozart was famous for his G minor pieces, like the G minor symphonies and the string quintet and things like that, and the scene with Barberina losing her pin in The Marriage of Figaro. Beethoven was famous for C minor, right? The C minor variations, the Pathetique Sonata, the Fifth Symphony, things like that. Well, Haydn's personal minor was F minor. And in Haydn, we know, because we know about texts, and this is one of the texts, that for Haydn, the key of F minor symbolized abandonment and desolation and loneliness, because his F minor pieces have texts that talk about that specifically. This is one of them. My Lord, why have you abandoned me? Right? And the it's like the song "O Tuneful Voice" he wrote before he left England. About being left alone and abandoned is an F minor. His cantata, some of his cantatas, he did Ariadne auf Naxos about being abandoned. Whenever Haydn is dealing with abandonment, he writes in F minor. Some of his, Sturm und Drang works, there's F sharp minor as well, which is sort of in the F minor family. The Farewell Symphony is in F sharp minor. And it's really a fascinating thing, if you know your Haydn, to take a look at his F minor pieces, because the meaning for him of this particular key, for some reason, is very, very clear. And this is one of the works that proves it and shows it in a very graphic way. So after that sonata, hang on a momentito here, we get to I Thirst, which is 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, and strings. And then back to where we go to Consummatum Est, which is 1 flute, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, and strings. And then the last sonata, which is, into thy hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. We have 2 flutes again, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, and violins muted this time. They're muted to give that extra soft texture, and of course to prepare for the insane contrast with the earthquake, which is the flute, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 horns, 2 trumpets, timpani, and strings without the mutes, right? Yeah, sure. So, as you hear, these contrasts are subtle, but they matter. They really matter. And so the performances with these chamber orchestras are particularly helpful because they help you to hear them. So we just finished with Storgards. And now there are another guy who did 2 of them, Saval, and he did them both superbly well. Now, Saval, this one is on Alia Vox, this one was on Astray. This one, the Alia Vox one, which is the one you're likely to find these days, this one was actually recorded in the church of Santa Cueva in Cadiz. It's an original instrument performance in the original place where it was performed. Not that that really makes any difference, but it's kind of nice to think about. He has a narration, a homily between each of the sonatas. Of course, it's not they're sort of updated and more modernized, and they're not an hour long each or whatever it was back in the day. They're fairly brief, thank God, and you can skip them because they're tracked separately, which is what I always do when I listen to these performances. But Saval is the 7 last words guy if you want period instruments. These are wonderful performances. I love them. I have them both, as you can see. I listen to them regularly when I feel like a 7 last words, which, believe it or not, I do, because it has nothing to do with, as I said, with whether you have to accept the religious doctrine that inspired it. I mean, these are beautiful tone poems based on extremely moving concepts, and so it works however you want to do it. However, when I'm in the mood for the 7 last words, as often as not, I turn to this one on Harmonia Mundi with Ensemble Resonance, conducted by Riccardo Minassi. This one is a knockout, folks. Now, the Ensemble Resonance uses modern instruments, but they're played in period style with full knowledge of historically influenced performance techniques, except they use vibrato, thank God. The violin scoring, it's about 10 violins, 4 violas, 3 cellos, a couple basses, and everybody else. It seems to me almost an ideal ensemble. You really hear the difference, for example, between 2 horns and 4 horns. The final earthquake is a knockout. This is on Harmonia Mundi, just in case you see that up there, Harmonia Mundi. And it's absolutely first class, completely first class all the way. 64 minutes of fun and games, Haydn style. And it just goes to show you that, there's so much more to Haydn than being a joker. And he obviously put so much thought and sweat into this piece. I mean, even the introduction and the earthquake, you would say, why is he going to write an earthquake? I mean, there's a point to this. The point is that Haydn even told us, he tells us in his biography, he often tried to embody spiritual qualities in his music, particularly his adagios, his slow music. Haydn was an adagio composer. Mozart never wrote a symphonic adagio. It's kind of interesting. I mean, he wrote sort of an almost adagio, one of them, but he was an andante composer. His music is all very, very singable and lyrical, and it moves quicker. Haydn wrote adagios because adagios are what you need when, in the classical style, you want to portray spirituality in music. Remember, in my talk in Making Music Spiritual, I mentioned that the way that you create spirituality, the sense of it, is by writing music which is suprahuman, which is either very, very slow, very sustained. If it's going to be vocal in style, which this is, it has to be vocal in style in a way that is bigger than what a single singer would do normally. So it has to sound like a supernatural voice, a bigger than human voice. And one way to do that is to write music which is very slow and very sustained. And that's what Haydn does in his adagios, and it's what he does in the seven last words. And the point of the earthquake, and the reason the earthquake is so necessary to the cycle as a whole, isn't just because Haydn's great at doing earthquakes, which he really is. It's a pretty good earthquake for what the period we're talking about. The reason it matters so much is because what he's doing is waking us up from this spiritual trance he's evoked in the rest of the piece. He's highlighting the contrast. One of the reasons we know that we've been listening to music which evokes this kind of spirituality is because the earthquake is so earthquakey. It's mundane. It's a concrete illustration of a terrestrial event, whereas all the rest of this is highly, highly abstract and highly, highly conceptual in meaning. And so it's that contrast that we hear at the very end that gives us a start and says, yes, this is what the rest of it means. And I mean, it's genius. It's genius the way Haydn plans this out. It's phenomenal. So please do listen to the seven last words of the Savior on the cross, whether or not you're Christian, whether or not you care, whether or not you go to church. It doesn't matter, because the music is stunning, expressive, deep, fabulous, amazing Haydn. And that's what matters. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you and enjoy.